What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
My name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive, and we are in week 3 of our Revelation series. Are you ready to do this, Dave?
Yeah. Let's do it. Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Definitely.
Energy, Dave. Let's go.
Energy. Yes.
I mean, you didn't just preach and recovering from that. We got to be right back on. We're ready.
We're ready. Let's go.
Let's go. Well, Dave, I hope you're doing well after today's service. And I had a chance to talk to Jerry Hogan. Shout out Jerry Hogan. He has been watching recently, and he was just giving some some feedback to us of that I need to be better at syncing up ideas with you so that you know where I'm going with things.
Oh.
Because last week there was this, I was talking about the shirts and how I texted you to plan it, and you were like, wait, you really texted me? And I was like, no. He was joking. He was laughing about it. I thought it'd be a fun way to...
I think we think we're funnier than we are. With this beginning, the podcast, we always try to do a little banter.
Yeah.
And I think we're hysterical, but I'm not sure how it comes off.
Well, it might just sound like two bumbling idiots.
I mean, if you listen to a lot of podcasts, that's what hosts often do on podcasts. Before they get into the subject matter, there's
a little back and forth, a little
banter
time
that goes on. I think we have great chemistry, Nick.
Thank you.
All right.
I think we do too.
Yeah.
I mean, it has been 100 episodes plus now.
Yeah.
So we should be decent at this at least.
Yeah. So why don't we get into this episode?
No.
You have something else you want to banter about?
No, I'm joking. Let's go, Dave. Come on.
All right. So we're in the third week of the Revelation series. And, I'm also doing the Bible study on Wednesday nights. And so sometimes it's kind of hard for me to keep track, but it's really only been 3 sermons since it's the third one this morning. And so if you've been following, you know that we're looking at the book of Revelation, and Sundays are pretty much reserved to focus on the churches. There is a broader message. There's many, many chapters that deal with other things, but it's all in being addressed to these 7 churches. And so on Sundays, we are looking at the messages that were to those 7 churches that were in present-day Turkey. And within each of those messages, there's usually some words of encouragement, and there's also some words of warning or challenge or rebuke or that sort of thing. So we're looking at it, and I got to thinking this week as we're doing it, it's an open letter. I mean, they probably passed around to the 7 churches so they could all see the dirty laundry of somebody else's church. And I wondered how that might be for us, because I mean, if John was writing a letter to us, I'm sure he would have some good things to say about Hickory Flat, because there's lots of good things to say about Hickory Flat. But I wonder what challenges or rebukes or warnings he might have for us. That's pretty sobering to think about.
Yeah, you mentioned that during the service, and I did kind of think, and nothing imminently popped up, but I'm sure for these people too, or for the people John was writing to, that they probably didn't see some of this stuff up front either. I think sometimes we get very caught in this, we do this stuff all the time. We're going through we're in some ways, sometimes maybe we even go through motions and stuff like that and not recognize maybe some of the things
I do think there's this human tendency to draw a circle around ourselves and say, hey, we got it right, and everybody else is, they got to work on their stuff, or they're wrong, but we got it right. And I think we may fail to see the subtle compromises, which it was, and I kind of emphasize that as well. We'll get into it as we get into the podcast, but that they were having, that were slipping away. I mean, from the church in Ephesus was slipping away from their first love. With most of the other churches, it's going to be a compromise away from and engaging. And I'm such a Bible and culture kind of person. Looking for how do we make it into our culture and times. But where are those places in our culture where we need to be separate from that? That's not who we are, without demonizing the other, but with witnessing to the other, but yet realizing that there are definitely lines that we can cross So I think there might, at least for myself, there might be some of that, you know.
Oh yeah, and I think you ask a very good question, because it is kind of trying to figure out is like, what is the line that we absolutely say, like, we're not going to go past this point, or do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I just feel like it's such a slippery slope.
Yeah,
you know?
I think within myself, I am wired up to want people to like me.
Yeah.
You know, and so when I preach, sometimes I don't think I'm probably as confrontive with some things that as I could be or maybe should be.
Yeah.
And you know, there are definitely things that need to be addressed and called out at times. And you know, I would rather, you know, and you know, the problem with that is you get away from the Bible and your sermons can sort of be reduced to like a TED talk or something.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes the gospel's hard and biting, and you know, I think.
I mean, that's why it says in the word that, so like,
Yeah.
you see a couple of accounts where people turned away because it says like the teachings were too hard. You know what I mean? Like, too hard for these people to keep up. So
Yeah. So anyway, so we looked at two churches today, and we'll probably look at two churches next time I preach. But we looked at Smyrna and Pergamos, the church in Pergamos. And so for Smyrna, it's interesting because there were two churches that he had no critique of. It was only words of encouragement. Smyrna, and then later on we'll get to Philadelphia. But Smyrna was a church in a very, very wealthy town, but yet they were very, very poor. And what you can, although it doesn't say it exactly, we just know the result of not giving in to the empire, not worshiping the emperor, not participating in those festivals and things, that was causing them to not be included in the economics that were happening at the time, and possibly caused some hardships for them with even family members. But one of the things I tried to stress is how hard it was to be a Christian during those days, because there was genuine persecution going on to the point of death. And he, you know, his encouragement to them was like, hang in there, even if you are in prison, even up to death. Realize that God's going to be with you, and if you die, you're going to be given a crown of life. Yeah. Now, that's kind of a hard message to receive in and of itself. Yeah.
I feel so blessed to be a Christian in America, because a lot of that persecution and stuff, like, you might hear somebody on the, you know, in the supermarket or, you know, at school walking down a hallway or something like that, they'd be like, where they don't agree. But I've never had to fear for my life because of what I think or what I believe. There's other places that do.
Yeah, it was dangerous, and there was a fear that, you know, following Jesus would cost their lives. Yeah. They had seen it. And, you know, in the case of the church in Smyrna, Polycarp, who was their leader at the time, had lost his life. You know, had witnessed at his death, but he lost his life for his faith. Yeah. And, I think we all need to say, would we be willing to do that? I mean, would we walk away? I mean, it was real for them. Yeah. And there's a great conviction there. There was, the second church we looked at was a church in Pergamos, and there was some encouragement for them, but there was also some rebuke for them. Yeah. And that was for this sort of, what's the word I use? Go along to get along, you know, going along to get along. Yeah. So we can do everything else that the culture around us is doing, and just to be able, so that, you know, we won't cause any waves, and so that we can participate in commerce, so that we won't be ostracized from our neighbors and family. And, you know, if you look around, hey, there's some good stuff going on here. Yeah. I mean, Rome has not been all bad. They've improved the economy. I mean, you know, they've opened up the world market. They've improved the infrastructure. We now have roads. We have aqueducts. So, I mean, what's wrong with just kind of giving in a little bit, going along? And, John, I think, knew where that was leading, and he used an example from the Old Testament in the book of Numbers of this king who wanted, they were in war with Israel, and he wanted this particular person, Balaam, to curse Israelites, and the king Balak did, and God wouldn't let him. And so what he did was he kind of did something very more subtle, brought in some Moabite women, and to entice and seduce the Israelite men, and it led them away. Right. And so I think that go along to get along is those usually, those one steps, because you don't usually, you're not going to surrender and worship the emperor with, under sword, but you might take these short little steps that lead you to the point where, what's it going to hurt?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I feel like we see this quite often, and I do wonder if the Western church overall, this might be a struggle for us, as things come up and people try to push us in one way or another, sometimes I don't know that we always do a good job of staying grounded.
I don't know. And it's easy to, I think, sometimes look at superficial things as like having coffee in church. Sure. There are people who say, well, now the church, I can't tell if it's a coffee bar or a church or whatever. I don't think that's really at the heart of what he's talking about. I watched a thing this week, and it was a men's conference, and they had like a monster trailer pull thing at that, and all this other manly stuff or whatever. Yeah. And, that seems a little sus to me, but I don't think those are the kinds of things that John's addressing. Yeah. It's just, I think it comes down to the ideology of where you're putting your heart and your allegiance and your loyalties to. Yeah. Is it in the emperor, or is it in Christ? Yeah. Did that make sense about the tractor pull? Yeah. Because those are kind of like little marginal steps. Like, am I at a men's conference, or am I at a monster truck pull?
Yeah. What you're basically like saying that sometimes to be thematic or something like that, it might not be.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that per se, but is that one of the small steps that can lead us somewhere? But
and more about entertainment maybe than
right
to the word or something.
Well, there's things that we do, because the church has responded to the culture and every time. People say, well, I want to sing the old hymns or whatever. Well, the old hymns were new hymns at one time. Yeah. So, the church has responded to whatever culture and time it was in. Yeah. We just, I think, have to be careful about making that the God,
Yeah, I think the purpose behind it is, like, if you're just trying to, like you were talking, where we've kind of met culture, I think of worship being an example of that. You mentioned, that some people are interested in the old hymns, and some people are really set on like a more contemporary style or a modern style, whatever the word is they're using for the worship now. And it's like, if we are good at or if we are still keeping the main thing and worshiping God, I don't see a problem in that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it's meeting people where they're at as well. I don't think certain hymns are holier than certain praise songs or anything like that. I think if it's leading us to God, that's the main part.
Right. Yeah. And I think sometimes the really extreme examples can kind of shine a spotlight on what the main thing might be. Yeah. And so, I mentioned and talked a good bit about the German church at the time of Nazism and Adolf Hitler. Yeah, and for lack of better terminology, just calling it German national, the German nationalism, the German nationalist church. Yeah. And now we have Christian nationalism that's kind of going on in America, and it's pretty pervasive with things. And so, how did it happen, and where did they go wrong? Right. Well, coming out of World War I, the way that the treaty was set up, Treaty of Versailles, I think it was, German people took the responsibility for everything. Yeah. And so then it became, and there was a lot of a pluralism that was going on in Europe at the time, and so kind of infringing in the bottle, and life around them was changing. There were foreigners there, and there were different systems that were going on, and it was unpopular to speak up and to be proud to be a German, to be proud of what that represented, and the economy was toast in Germany. And so this guy comes along, and he's saying, no, you should be proud to be a German. In fact, Germans are superior, the Aryan race. God put us on this planet, and we're more intelligent than these other people. God has given us a destiny. And like as I pointed out in the service there, the Nazi belt buckle said, Gott mit uns, which is God with us. And so it was very much embedded with Christian language around it. Yeah. And so the preachers at that time, they're either, there's a whole variety. There's a wide range that you can see. There are people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer was going like, that is a false gospel. Yeah. That's worshiping the state. That's not worshiping God. And so there were others who would say, I don't like all this rhetoric that Hitler's got. I don't like a lot of things he says, but I will tell you this: he has been good for Germany, and he's been good for the economy. And it is adjacent to a lot of Christian stuff, and so I'm willing to go along with it. And it's going along to get along. I'm afraid if I speak out about the things that kind of concern me, I'm afraid of what might happen to me. So there's those people all the way to the preachers who were like, he is, like one of the guys I quoted in church said, he is a miracle and a gift, Hitler is. And so, for several years there, German nationalism was, took over the German church. And I think it is, when we shine the light on that, it was like, what is the God? Is the state the God, or is Christ the God? Yeah. And so, Jesus said to love your neighbors, love your enemies, those kinds of things. But we're not going to talk about those things. We're going to talk about, the verses that can be used out of context that can be very anti-Semitic against the Jewish people, and that the Jews killed Jesus and all that stuff, and lead down this rabbit trail so that you end up endorsing anti-Semitism. And and for some of them, when they finally woke up and said this is wrong, it was dangerous for them, to the point of like one of the guys I quoted this morning ended up in a concentration camp and was going to be killed. But he was the one who said, famously, you've heard that quote, and it's been altered in different ways. First they came from the socialists, and I wasn't a socialist, so I said nothing. Then they came from the trade unionists, and I wasn't one of them, so I didn't say anything. Then they came from the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, so then they came from me. And there was nobody else. And so, knowing when, there's a certain amount of like compromise just to be a part of society, but when we're going along to get along, where does it cross the line where it becomes something else and not our Christian faith? Yeah.
I really like that you mentioned this morning too, of like these stories of these people who were in the midst of it, that it'd be really easy. It's really easy for us to look back and go, what were they thinking? Why would they have followed Hitler and stuff like that? But you have to you really have to take a step back and kind of really put yourself in their shoes of like how life was just happening around them. And, maybe where they were like, this isn't so bad. And they took a step. They didn't realize the slope that they were kind of going down.
Well, they tapped in. Yeah, they tapped in. I listened to a podcast with people talking about this week, and they were talking about what they really tapped in, what Hitler really tapped into, and this movement really tapped into was a low burning rage and anger that they had. They were not comfortable with the way the world was going, and they felt left out. Yeah. And that gave them a voice. And, I look around the country today, and there are people that are there. There's a lot of people angry. They feel left out. They feel like life is passing them about. They feel like every other group is getting, their kudos except for them, and they've been, demonized. And there's an anger there, and it's so something like Christian nationalism can give voice and rise to that.
Yeah, and that's a scary place to see, But also, it's like, what do we learn from the past, right? There's that famous statement is that history will repeat itself. You know what I mean? If we don't recognize it.
Well, that's the quote. I don't know, it may be too small for me to read here, but I ran across this Beth Moore quote, which I used this morning. He said, "When our story is told a century from now, and it will be, how much of the American church has run after false idols and delusions, false Christ and conspiracies. History will not shy away, from rebuking pastors who didn't call out the truth, and he also said congregations who forbade them to." And so I know, and I honestly don't feel, I felt free to say this morning,
Sure.
but I know, I have colleagues who are afraid to say some things in church because they're afraid of losing their job because, the congregation wants to hear a certain message in a certain way. And so it can be scary.
Yeah. Especially when it starts impacting life and stuff like that. But I mean, that is the hard part of the gospel too, right? Is that, it basically says quite often that, you're going to be aliens to this world and stuff like that, which people are not going to understand. But it's just, that is something, a personal is like, that has been something hard to live into for me because like you, and I think really probably a lot of church staff type people really want to be liked. You know what I mean? Like they want to be in good community. They want people to appreciate them and stuff like that. But sometimes calling out hard truth is the best way to love. And sometimes I feel like I don't take the freedom
you don't,
to do that.
you don't want to stir the pot.
Yeah.
You want to, that, or you couch it in a way that, kind of is comfortable for people.
Yeah.
And wondering where the compromise might have come in the message, and I don't think and it's just like, coming out with like something really harsh sometimes is not well received.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to lead people there in subtle ways, but better make sure that you are leading them there,
Right.
and not just leaving them where they are.
Yeah.
And so, it's hard. And I do think, we do have some parallels that we can pull from both the Roman Empire and what was going on there, from what was happening in Germany around that time, and some of the things that we see here in the United States today. So we need to be faithful to our message and to the gospel of Christ. And what we'll get on, because this has been a pretty heavy podcast, and so just as we get to the last couple of minutes, there is good news in all of this.
Yeah.
It was terribly, terribly hard for them for a couple of centuries.
Yeah.
It was lots of martyrs, lots of tribulation that the church went through, but the church continued to grow, and they grew because of love, and the way that they felt included and treated other people. And my last sermon will be largely about that. And so there is good news that even though this was harsh, that at the time they, for the most part, I think heard these words from John and answered the call, and the church grew, continued to grow despite all of this oppression. The church continued to grow to the point that it became the official religion of the Roman Empire with Constantine. Now, that's not as clean and dry as all that, and there's some stuff to be critiqued about that, and particularly as the church got power. We got things like the Crusades and stuff like that, but the point is, the church thrived and grew under this terrible persecution. And so I do think we can take encouragement in that. They made it. They made it.
So if just kind of a question maybe to wrap us up is, if because we've kind of talked about like, things that might be happening as in the world. If people are to kind of recognize something in the church wide or maybe even local church, how do they go about talking about it? How do they go about coming alongside maybe leaders or coming alongside their peers and bringing it up in a loving way? Does this make sense?
I think it's a very important question. I think
Yeah.
you might have answered it at the very end.
Okay.
I mean, I do think we have to approach things with love.
Yeah.
I do think that, and we actually had a conversation about this earlier this week. I do think there is a biblical model for kind of confrontation.
Yeah.
And I think it does, rather than talking about somebody or whipping up another group, getting a side all together to go to war against whatever. I think it sits down. It begins with sitting down with the persons that are involved and having an honest conversation.
Yeah.
And then if that doesn't work, I think you have to bring in some other people to help work on what that conflict or question might be.
Yeah.
And I do think there is a time when we just have to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Because I know, and we want the whole Methodist conversation that's going on. I've had to agree to disagree with some very good friends, and we still love each other.
Yeah.
And I still respect them and hope them well in their churches because there's a need in this world for the gospel of Christ, and so lots of different churches who may have people who are in different places.
Yeah.
But I think back to John Wesley's words, there are some things that we can go on. I think he said in non-essentials charity, in essentials unity, in all things love.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where we have to start and end is with love.
Good.
It's hard to do that when you're angry.
It is.
It's hard to do that when you feel left out and alienated.
Yeah.
And that's what was going on in Germany. And, what I see happening a lot today. So if we have disagreements with people, I think, love is a hard thing. It's a messy thing, but I think we do have to get to that place of it.
Yeah. That openness, that honesty, and the love to show love in that way. Mm-hmm. Well, Dave, I think that's about the time we've got here. As you guys know, there's a lot to Revelation. There's a lot to unpack, and as Dave said, I just want to remind you and keep plugging that on Wednesdays, except this Wednesday, right? You don't have class.
Yeah, this Wednesday, I'm actually going out of town on Wednesday for a few days. And so I won't be here on Wednesday, and so everybody now needs a break.
Sure, yeah,
because it's been pretty heavy stuff. So yeah, we'll take this Wednesday off, but we'll pick back up on the next Wednesday, and of course, we have church here every Sunday. So
absolutely,
yeah.
so keep coming. But that's just a great place to get some more supplemental stuff about some of the other parts of Revelation as well. Because it's hard to condense this into a 5-6 week sermon series. There's a lot. And so what they're able to do is, we're able to hit kind of the church side here. As Dave said earlier, they're kind of plugging some of the other parts through that class. So I just want to encourage you that if what you're hearing is sparking an interest or sparking questions or something like that, that's a great place to come to have those questions. Because my guess is if you have that question, probably somebody else has that question too that might be too nervous to ask it. So I just want to keep that out in front of you guys as another option to kind of dive a little deeper into that. But this has been a great episode, Dave. Thank you for all this. And if you guys have any questions, you can drop them in the comments below. And without further ado, you guys take care, and we'll catch you next time.
God bless. See ya.